let's try to understand the closures in JavaScript and what's the requirement of it. So we know the global scope variables and the local scope variables in JavaScript. But if you want to keep your global scope variables and use it like a local scope and you want to restrict other functions should not use it, so we can make closures around it. So closures is not any formal syntax in JavaScript, but it is just the arrangement you are making with the arrow function, anonymous function, global variables and the local variables. And let's see in which scenarios it will be useful. So let's start with the code. I need a simple function, for example, here, which will keep incrementing the number. So I'm creating a function called increment. I don't want any input for this. And I want to keep one global variable here with the name count, which is equals to 0 in this case. Or let me just start with 1. And the job of this increment function is to console, or better we can say, to return the incremented number. And before returning, let's say it is also incrementing it. That sounds good. And now what we can do, we can just console. So I'm calling it 3 times, and whatever the output is coming of this function, I just want to console that. So in this case, we should get 2, 3, 4. To make it more simple, let's start with 0. So now every time this function is getting called, the global variable which is available on the 5 is getting incremented by 1. And here we are getting the updated results. And this is the reason we are getting 1, 2, 3 in this case. So now what's the problem here? Let's say we are writing a huge program, and in that the count variable is a global one now. So let me just also highlight it here. It's a global variable. So any other function which is present inside this file, or maybe the program which is written on the same web page, can make use of this variable. So they can also change this variable, which will create unwanted, unexpected behaviors. Let's say here itself, after calling first time the increment method, I'm trying to change the value inside my count variable to 10. Now, this count is a global variable. We can access it anywhere. So the same way I'm trying to access it. But if I change that in between, the functionality which is written inside the increment function, which it will misbehave. And that's what the problem here. And now if I run the program, so we are getting unexpected results because the global variable count, we are using it by considering only the function increment will be using, but it is also available to be used by other functions, or maybe globally any other developer can also change it. So we need some restriction now. What is that? So the global variable which is present here should not be accessed by any other function, any other code except my increment function. So how to do that? That's what the problem statement. We'll try to solve it with a small step here. So what we will do, we'll remove this particular declaration which is available globally, and we'll keep it inside the function. So this is the only way available till now to keep this variable available only inside the function. Now this is a local scope variable which will be available inside only this function. But with this, it is also one more problem. Let me just mention it. It's a local variable now. So every time we are calling this function, it is getting initialized to 0. So it doesn't making any sense, because every time 0 is getting 1, 0 is getting 1, it is not incrementing and remembering the previous value of our function. That's a problem here. So let me save the code and show you. Again, there is a one more problem if I'm keeping it inside. So we have seen the both problems, if I'm keeping it inside or if I'm keeping it outside. So what's the next solution for this problem? So what we can do now, I'll keep this particular variable locally available here itself. And here I'll try to create a new function. So let the name of the function say plus, And this is a local function. This is a nested function. So this function can access the variable which is present outside. Fine. So what I can do here, I can say count plus equals to 1. Let me remove this count. Let me also remove this return statement from here. Now, what's my intention? My intention is to initialize with 0, and later I have written one function which will keep incrementing my counter. So now whenever I'll call this function, it should increment my counter by 1. But where I can do that? Can I do it here? No, we can't do, because it's a local function available. The scope of this is available only within the function it is being declared within the scope. So instead of doing here, I'll say plus here. Again, I'll say plus here. And better I'll say return the count. So I can also apply a console better. I'm calling this particular local function 3 times here, and you can observe each and every time this function is getting called from line number 11, 12, and 13, it is making use of the count variable which is available above in above scope over here. So we should get the perfect output 1, 2, 3. But now, how to call the function increment? Because after calling the increment function only, these statements will get called. So at least I need to call the increment function once. So what's happening now? When I'm calling increment function, it is getting initialized to 0. The function definition is there, no execution. Then we are executing and calling the plus function 3 times. So we should get an expected output here 1, 2, and 3. Yes, we are getting it. So we are almost near to the solution. We need this increment to happen 3 times, and we want to get our output because we want to call the function globally, not something like this locally, which is available on the line of 11, 12, and the 13. So that's the problem here. So just for now, if you ignore and remove these lines, and now you can see this is equivalent to what we need. And again, it is creating the problem which was initially. Now again, this let variable is becoming a global variable and anyone can access. So even though you are putting it inside a function, and if you keep writing other things here, so again, it's a big problem. Still, we are not mentioning that this particular local variable called count is only available within this plus function. We are still lacking with the solution here. So the solution here is we need to create a anonymous function. So we are creating one anonymous function in which I want to make sure the execution of the count is happening only once. And then the plus function definition, which is counting something and incrementing it. I don't want to do the console and everything over here. And I'll return the plus function over here. Let's carefully understand what's happening here. We are having an anonymous function, the count variable here, and we are returning a function which can keep incrementing my variable which is present on the line number 4. But if I call the increment 3 times again here, and let me just make it inside a console. So if I'm calling this particular increment 3 times, again, you can observe it's the same problem. What is that? Every time the count is getting initialized to 0. So instead of that, I want to get execute count equal to 0 only once. So what I will do for this particular anonymous function, I'll execute here itself when I'm declaring it. So I'll apply the rounded brackets here again here. So I'm enclosing the function and I'm trying to execute it. What's happening here? Very first thing, when the program execution coming on the line number 3, this is not only the function declaration, this is also function execution we are doing. We are also running the function. So it means before calling the line number 12, 13, and the 14, the line number like 3, 4, 5, these are getting executed. So as we are executing this function, the let count equal to 0 is getting initialized. And when it is getting initialized, it is happening only once because we are performing the execution of this anonymous function only once here on this line. So we are ready with one variable here. And now what I'm returning here? I'm returning again one more anonymous function, which is incrementing the variable present here. And whatever the return I'm doing here, this return function will be available inside my variable called increment. And I'm calling this increment function now 3 times. So it is executing this code 3 times. And you can see now it is using the local variable, which is not global, which is not also local, which is just one step above the local and one step below the global, we can say. So this is the way we are solving the problem, and we are converting a global scope variable to a one step down a local, and it is also not a local variable, we can say, because it is also one step above the local variable because we are not declaring it inside a function here. Fine, let's see the outcome. Yes, and now if any number of time I'll call my increment function, there should not be any problem with this. So this is how, with the closures in JavaScript, we can convert a global scope variables to a local scope variable and make our program more powerful.